Might get lost in your green eyes. In the wood, there's a wildfire, wildfire, wildfire. Your light is a friend of mine. When I'm lost on the dark side, in the wood, there's a wildfire, wildfire, wildfire. Your warmth like summertime. Might get lost in your green eyes. In the wood, there's a wildfire, wildfire, wildfire. Your light is a friend of mine. When I'm lost on the dark side, in the wood, there's a wildfire, wildfire, wildfire. Hey, we stay awake like that. A new day, a new place, like that. A new face, a new stage, like that. We stay awake like that. Like
Hey, good morning. And just want to welcome you into this space. Can you hear me now? All right. We will start with a technical difficulty, which I feel like is just in keeping with this week. So there we go. I just want to welcome you guys from home. Welcome to Wellhouse at home. And I just want to start this morning by just kind of acknowledging the week. I want to just start this morning by just taking a breath. You know, I don't know about you, but this whole week just seemed like there was something off even more than normal. I mean, we've lived in a season right now where nothing has felt normal for quite some time. But this week in particular, it just seemed like it was just extra abnormal. It just seemed like that, you know what, there was just something a little bit extra. And so it was that moment where yesterday, you know, we're supposed to be out doing barbecues and 4th of July celebrations and fireworks, and Lori and I were out in a part of town, and it just seemed barren. It just seemed empty. It just seemed like that maybe there was a little bit of a letdown, and that just seems to be the season we're in right now. And I just want to kind of start this morning by acknowledging that, because I know you are feeling some of that. You're feeling like maybe this is just a season that won't end. It's like you take a step forward and then we take two steps back, and it's just this season of desert. It's this season of wilderness that we've been talking about that will not simply end. You know, I was reading something this last week where psychologists have done some studies over the last several months that we've been in this pandemic, and then we've been in this season of just unrest. And they said that estimated most of Americans right now are operating at about 66% of full capacity. They said, in fact, we have moved out of a season of crisis, which typically lasts about 6 weeks, and now we have entered into a season of what they call chronic stress. It's like we wake up with it and we go to bed with it. There's just these moments of stress that we don't know how to shed, and they're abnormal and they're elongated, way beyond what we typically deal with and know how to deal with. And so it's this question, what do we do with all of this? And one of the things that we do is we do what we're doing this morning. We're just going to get together and we're going to worship, and we're going to spend some time praising a Father who is good and is faithful. We're going to spend some time in His Word where He's going to walk us through some desert, some wilderness today, so that we get a little bit closer today than we were yesterday to a new normal. And then I'm reminded, and I woke up this morning with the words of Peter, who was reflecting on Jesus. And he said in 1 Peter, when he was writing to an audience much like what we are dealing with, an audience that was just unrested, and they were stressed and they were tense. And here's what he said. He said, cast or throw, get it off of you, all your anxiety, all your worry, all your burdens, all your trouble. He says, just cast that on the Lord. And then he says, here's why. Because He cares. And I just want to remind you, and maybe this morning you need to be reminded, that the Lord cares. He cares. And He sees you, and He hears you, and He feels what these deep groans within us are all about. And so so this morning, part of that casting is just going to be spending some time in worship. So Father, this morning as we gather around your throne, as we gather in homes and as we gather in on back decks and as we gather in cars, maybe listening, as we gather wherever it is, God, we know you will meet us in that place, and when you enter into that place, you're okay with us throwing some things at you. You're okay with us casting some things, some heavy things, because that's how much you care. And so, Father, I pray that you would relieve us in this moment, that, God, you would strengthen us in this moment, that, God, you would revive us and refresh us in this moment. And above all, God, will you remind us in this moment that we are not alone, that you care. We pray this through your Son's name. Amen.
All right, let's worship the Lord together. Stand up in your rooms. Here we go.
Step out of the grave, break into the wild, and don't be afraid. Run into wide open spaces, graces waiting for you. Dance like the weight has been lifted, graces waiting. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, there is freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, there is freedom. Come out of the dark, just as you are, into the fullness of His love. Oh, the Spirit is here, let there be freedom. Let there be freedom. Yeah. Bring all of your burdens, bring all of your scars. Come back to communion, come back to the start. Run into wide open spaces, graces waiting for you. Dance like the weight has been lifted, graces waiting. Where the Spirit of the Lord, there is freedom, there is freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord, there is freedom, there is freedom. Come out of the dark, just as you are, into the
promises are yes and amen. Beautiful Savior, you have brought me near. You pulled me from the ashes, you have broken every curse. Blessed Redeemer, you have set this captive free. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, all your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, yeah. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. Let's rest in our Father this morning. Here we go. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Faithful, faithful you are. Faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. Faithful, faithful you are. Faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. Yeah. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen.
Do you remember normal? It was a Monday morning commute. A playground with the kids. Normal was deciding between a booth or a table. But now, normal looks new. New ways to spend our time. New ways we interact with each other. New ways we experience God. Normal changed. Will you?
Well, Good morning again. I just want to welcome you. If you haven't been welcomed already or you're joining us late, just welcome to our Back at Home series. We are just excited about continuing this series called New Normal this morning. And so I just want to say welcome to all of you. We have been in a series called New Normal, and what we have discovered so far is that maybe normal as we knew it was never meant to be normal. Or maybe that the normal that we were used to for so long really wasn't even that great. We've also discovered that maybe God wants us to come out of this season different than we went in and create some new normals, or create some, if you will, some faith-building things or some growth that happens in this season that we've called the wilderness. Maybe there's some things that are happening in this time that's transforming us to step into a new normal, a better normal. We've been following the Israelites on their journey from slavery. They were in Egyptian slavery, and God made a way for them to be freed. And they are moving toward a promised land, a land that is going to be good, and it's going to be better than anything that they have ever experienced or anything that they could even imagine. And so we're in the middle of that journey. They're moving through the desert. They're moving through the wilderness in order to get where God wants them to go. Now, they're currently experiencing some pretty tough moments. They've experienced a moment where they were on the edge of the Red Sea and there was no way to get through it, and there was an army that was pressing behind them in order to come and recapture them and re-enslave them. And there was a moment where there was high anxiety and there was high tension and high stress, and God showed out. It was these moments that we see where God is testing their faith, but He's also reacquainting them with the God that He is, this God that is faithful. And so today what we're going to see is we're going to see that there are some cravings that set in. And all of us have these cravings that set in. And when we begin to kind of think on and dwell on and obsess over these cravings, if we're not careful, what happens is this: our cravings don't get satisfied. Not fully anyway. They don't meet our expectations. We have a craving and then something happens that fulfills that craving. And when it doesn't meet our expectation, when it doesn't satisfy us, complaints follow. We turn to complaints. Anybody have that person, and you don't have to nudge somebody at the table with you. I don't want you to cross the table with your eyes and go, he's talking about you. But does anybody have that family member or that friend that you just hate going to dinner with, because you know that when you go to dinner with them, nothing's going to be right? That it's going to be an onslaught of things that are wrong. You walk in and it's this moment. Well, why are you setting us here? We'd rather be sitting near the window. Can you believe they've set us back here in the corner? And right out of the gate, you know what? This booth's a little small. I mean, I wish can we get a table instead? And then you finally get to the table and it's like, if the breadsticks or the chips and salsa don't go down immediately, is there not anyone that works here that cares about my chips and salsa need for the moment? And we've been sitting here for 60 seconds, and then you take orders and it takes too long. Now you got a chip crammed in your throat and you're like, all I needed was a drink. Does it take that long to pump a drink? And it's like, are you kidding me? We haven't even gotten to the food yet. Then the food comes out. This steak is not done enough. Then you send it back, and then they come back with it. Now the steak's too done. And before you know it, here's what's going to happen. The Karen comes out because somebody's going to ask to see the manager, right? It's that moment where, I'm going to need to see the manager. And so the manager comes out and he or she does what they normally do. Is there anything I can do? What can I? Well, there is something you can do. You tell me what you can do. I've got people in my life that every single time we go out, we went out to an Italian restaurant that doesn't just give you the entree, they give you an entree to go on your way out. And she got the entree that was a kind of a bonus entree. You didn't even pay for it. And she looks at it after we had already had this massive meal and goes, that's all I get to take home? And it's like, are you kidding me? And so it's these people, it's friends or it's family where you go, I don't really want to go out with you because there's never anything right. It's a constant complaint. And there's sometimes that you wished you had what I'm going to call a comp button to just turn things off. I remember several years ago, I was working for a church and the best sound engineer, like just such a great guy. And so I had switched my role from kind of doing some student things to preaching every week. And I was kind of the lead guy at that point. And so as a result of that, I spent a lot of time back at the sound booth that I normally had not spent time at the sound booth. And so I'm back there and they would wire me up and get me ready and do sound checks and all this. And so I knew nothing about sound or tech gear at that point. I still don't, but I learned a little bit during that time. And so on a soundboard, there's all these knobs and faders and things that do things. And at any given time, the sound engineer was touching things and moving things and adjusting things. And I noticed that each channel had a number, and then below that number, he had taped notes. So one said bass, and I was like, okay, I know what that means. And one said like main speaker, and I knew what that must be mine, and I'd watch him as I would sound check, he would move that. But then there was one that just said comp. It just said comp. And I thought, oh, that must be computer. And so I was like, hey, man, is this one for the computer when we play videos? And he goes, no. He says, this is the coolest button. It's like an effect that I use every Sunday. Have you not noticed it? And I was like, no, what's it do? And he goes, just hang out. I use it every single Sunday, and it's awesome. I was like, okay. So sure enough, we get kind of into the first song, and I see a guy come up, and he leans over, and they have a conversation. I saw him touch the comp button. He kind of winks at me, and the guy kind of gives a thumbs up, and he moves on. And I was like, okay, what is it? So he tells me afterwards. He said, every single week, I have people who come up and complain. The music's too loud, or I can't hear, or it's blasting me out, or the bass is too much of this and that. And he said, so what I do is I have a comp button. I have a complaint fader, and it doesn't do anything. He said, but they think it does. And so if it's too loud, I pull it down and they go, perfect, that is awesome. He goes, the comp button makes people go away. Don't you wish sometimes you had a comp button that would just make the complainers go away? Or better yet, do you wish that maybe internally you had a comp button that the complaints wouldn't rule your life? Maybe you have gotten to a place where you have become that person and you're aware of it enough to go, I don't really like it, but it's just what I do. See, as a whole, I don't know if it's just the culture it's not, because it's not a new thing. But as a whole, I think we just love to complain, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if we love to complain because we're just that selfish, and so we just think everything revolves around us. I don't know if we love to complain because we have this sense of entitlement, that I'm due something, I've earned something, I deserve something. I don't know if maybe we are just a people that likes to complain because it's just habitual, it's just become a habit. And so it's just the default. It's like something, and we just default to that. And so it's constant. I'm too hot, or I'm too cold, or I hate when it rains, but I also hate when it sun shines because then it's humid. And it's just this onslaught. I'm too hungry, and now I'm too full. And so it's just this habitual way that we live. And so the question this morning is, how do we either shed ourselves or help the Karens in our life? How do we keep from being that? How do we get to this place where we get off the complain train and begin to live life more free? And I think that it starts with recognizing where it comes from. I think we have to recognize why it so quickly gets embedded in us. And I think we have to start at the place where we understand who all is involved here. Because I think we lack the awareness of knowing who all is involved. And like I said earlier, this is not a new problem. I love what the Ecclesiastes writer says. He says, what has been will be again. And what has been done will be done again. He says, there's nothing new under the sun. This is not a current culture problem. This is a people problem. And so we see this roll on the scene in Exodus chapter 16. This group is moving from slavery in Egypt to this promised land. And you would think that there would be this it would be this sort of excitement in the air, right? You've just left slavery. And you are heading toward a land that you have been promised, your ancestors have been promised. You would think there would just be this era of satisfaction, and you wouldn't even really care what was going on because it was better than where you came from. And we don't get very far to see that, the Israelites begin to say, we need to see the manager. We've got a list of complaints. And so let's pick up with the complaint in chapter 16. If you're joining along, we're going to put it on the screens as well. But in verse 2, it says, in the desert, the whole community grumbled. They complained against Moses and Aaron. I want to stop right there for just a second, because it's this moment where something's not right and we don't like it. And first of all, I think we got to realize that this, when we talked about where it comes from and how did it get here and it's habitual and all these kinds of things, this is not the first time they complain. In fact, you don't have to go back very far. Just go back to last week. They're standing on the Red Sea. They're standing on those shores and they complain. They say, what are we doing, Moses? It would have been better off if we had just stayed. In fact, are there not enough graves in Egypt? So you brought us out here to die? And then you roll back even farther. They're in the midst of getting freed. In Exodus chapter 5, Moses is making arrangements for them to come out of slavery and into freedom. And they gripe and they complain because now there's no straw, and they just say, what Moses? Thank you a lot. Now Pharaoh is annoyed with us. We've become obnoxious, and now they've even cracked down the whip even more on us. It was this constant. It was not a singular instance in Exodus 16. It was something that they had become habitual, but here's the real detriment. It had become spiritual. This had turned into a spiritual issue at this point. See, and I want you to notice right out of the gate, look where it comes from. It says that in the desert, see, when things aren't to our liking, when we feel like we're in a desert, that's when these complaints begin to roll. See, when stress presses in and when tension mounts up, or in life, when the heat gets turned up, we tend to complain. It's just what we go to unless we kind of teach ourselves or we have an awareness to do something different. Here's what I'm saying. It's all about atmosphere and circumstances. And here's what I mean. Write this down if you're at home. When the atmosphere is unpleasant and the circumstances are unfamiliar, complaints will roll in. Let me say it again. When the atmosphere is unpleasant and the circumstance is unfamiliar, complaints start rolling. Let's talk about the unpleasant for a second. See, our patience tends to diminish when the heat rises. And let's face it, in the desert's not a comfortable place to be. It's where they were, and it's not comfortable. It was hot. It was dry. It was dusty. There was no food. There was no water. People were restless. The kids were going nuts. Some of you are like, that's kind of describes my last 6 weeks at home. It was this moment that was unpleasant. It was seemingly never ending. They couldn't find shade. They couldn't escape the sun. They were tired. It wasn't accommodating all their needs. It wasn't giving them everything that they wanted or had hoped for or had heard about or wished for. It wasn't meeting their expectations. And so complaints begin to roll in this unpleasant atmosphere. It was the moments where they're like, hey, I thought we were heading to a promised land. I thought this place was supposed to have all kinds of milk and honey. And I mean, this sucks. This is not good. In fact, Moses, there's nothing great about this at all. In fact, we had rather just stayed where we were. So I'm just going to kind of sit here because we know that's not an option. We're obviously nowhere close to getting where we want to go. So I'm just going to sit here and complain. I'm going to let you know how I feel in this unpleasant atmosphere that we have found ourselves in the midst of. Now, before we get all too judgy on this is what we do. This is, if we're not careful, who we become. We do the same thing. Our journey goes through a desert. Our journey goes through a wilderness. Our life tightens up for just a moment. There's some sort of unforeseen stress that comes and enters into our life. There's an unfortunate turn that happens because you had some things planned out and all of a sudden there's an unforeseen and an unfortunate turn and it tailspins us and we end up in an unpleasant place, just like the Israelites, a place where it's dry and it's hot and it's restless and it seemingly is never ending. I don't know about you, that describes this whole season for me. It especially describes this last week. We took a step forward and then we take 2 steps back and it's unpleasant. We go through a trial, we go through a hardship, we go through something that knocks us out of our place of comfort, and it happens because life is broken. And it's like you can see the meter raise. 3, 2, 1, boom. And complaints start rolling out in these unpleasant atmosphere. And we can even have this head knowledge that we know that God is going to provide. I mean, after all, they had just seen God provide before their very eyes. And we've seen it. But it doesn't keep us from doubting. And it doesn't keep us from feeling the unpleasantry. It doesn't keep us from grumbling and mumbling and complaining about these things. And the truth is this: we don't like unpleasant atmospheres. And we don't like unfamiliar circumstances. They were used to Egypt. For good or bad, that's what they were used to. It's what they knew. It's what they were familiar with. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in some uncharted, unknown, and unfamiliar territory in an unfamiliar circumstances, and things go haywire. And let's be honest, you and I, we fear the unknown. We fear the unfamiliar. We get antsy in the unfamiliar. We just get anxious and nervous and all these sorts of things. We get highly uncomfortable in the unfamiliar circumstance, and before you know it, if we're not careful, we just end up complaining about the unfamiliarity. See, we're comfortable with what we know, even if what we know is not that good. But when we get out of that, when we're forced out of that, when we're shaken up or we're driven out or we're guided out of it. Because see, I think there's some things that maybe God is guiding us out of, but now all of a sudden we're in this season of unknown and it's unfamiliar and we don't know what to do with it. And so we just fall back on what we know, and so we complain. See, there's comfortableness in the familiar, and there's tension that comes with the unknown. And so here's the things that get us. You don't know where it comes from? It comes from atmosphere and circumstance. It comes from unpleasant atmospheres and unfamiliar circumstance. Now, here's where it gets dicey. This is where it gets dangerous. And they stepped into this danger zone and they didn't even realize that they were in the danger zone. And I think sometimes we step into a dangerous, dicey place and we don't even realize it. See, because we have convinced ourselves that in this lifestyle or this mentality, this habit of complaining, that it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. I mean, we're only complaining about the steak being too raw. We're only complaining that the seat is not next to the window. That we're only complaining that it's a booth and not a table. We're only complaining because my car is blue and it's not black. We're only complaining. We get in this mindset where it's not that big of a deal. We're only complaining about little small things. But in doing so, I'm afraid we forget what the Israelites forgot. It's not about complaining about the what, but it's about complaining about the who. It's about the who. Look at verse 8. Verse 8, it says that Moses said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread in the morning. Because he has heard your grumbling against him." Who are we? So you're not grumbling against us, but you are grumbling against the Lord. Notice that Moses turns and he focuses in. He goes, be careful. You're not complaining about food. You're complaining against the Lord. He says, see, when those complaints seem meaningless, he says they're not. He says you need to be reminded of who it is that you're complaining about. It's a complaint against God. See, and here's why. In those moments that we complain about what seemingly is meaningless, we complain against God's sovereignty. We complain against and we question his faithfulness. We question his goodness. We question his provision. We question what? His faithfulness, his goodness, his power. And they didn't even realize that's what they were doing. And you go, whoa, hold up. I mean, they were hungry. That's not a bad complaint, right? I mean, they needed food. I mean, they were kids and older people. I mean, everybody needs food. I mean, they were only complaining about a necessity. It was the moment where they go, is it really that big of a deal, right? I mean, is that a bad complaint? I mean, without food, we're going to die. Without water, we're going to die. What's the big deal? And here's the big deal. When we complain about those things, we act like God doesn't care. We have this moment where the complaint is arranged in such a way that we're implying that God doesn't care. He doesn't listen. He doesn't see. He doesn't understand. He isn't aware of my need. It's the moment where we question, can he or will he even come through? And I think it was Moses' subtle way of saying, why has it got to come in the form of a complaint? All they had to do was ask. God was aware that there was no food in the desert. He led them there. God was aware that there wasn't going to be a river or creek that everyone could get water from freely. God was aware of all these things, and they were by design, because he was trying to draw them into him, closer to him, so that he could be known as the provider. And all they had to do was ask. But instead of asking, they accuse. Instead of inquiring, God, we would love, can you, if you see us, if you don't mind. No, they criticize. They blame. They blame God for their lack of wants. And here's what happens. When we enter into that mentality and that habit and that mindset, we enslave ourselves. See, they left slavery from Egypt, but they were still slaves to their cravings, their complaints, and their desires and their wants. And it wasn't just about the problems they were facing. Now, hear me on this. The problems they were facing were real. But in addition to the problems they were facing, their complaining was creating problems out of thin air. It wasn't just the problems they were facing, it was now they're creating problems by their mindset. They were creating problems by what they were complaining about. And I don't know about you, but that's us. That's me sometimes. Because I find myself, or I know others, that just live in a state, they live in a cell of misery. Partially, yes, by some unfortunate circumstances, but primarily because of the way they deal with those circumstances, the way they handle those atmospheres. And so they wake up complaining, they go to bed complaining, they wake up grumbling, they go to bed grumbling, and before you know it, they have built a cell that still enslaves them. Let me show you what I mean. And by the way, I love what God does. I love how God, even in the midst of our misery, in the midst of our complaints, in the midst of our disgruntled Karen moments, that God still shows up and he shows his grace. Look at verse 11. The Lord said to them, said to Moses, he said, I have heard the complaints, I've heard the grumbling of Israel. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. I love that even in the midst of this, God shows his grace. God says, okay, I hear you. I know what you need. Then you will know that I am the Lord. It says, it goes on to say that night the quail and the meat fell to the ground, and it was like dew. It was like everywhere that you found. And it was this moment as they walked out and they saw this new manna, this bread, and even at that, they can be like, what is this? And it's like this moment where he says, it's what the Lord has provided for you. If you read this story in its entirety, here's what happens. They still complained. God gives them meat by the baskets full. He gives them bread by the baskets full. Well, but you guys remember when we were in Egypt and we had fish? You guys remember in Egypt when we had fruits and berries, and they still complain. They have enslaved. They left slavery, but they're still slaves. They're just slave to something they've created now. They're enslaved because they live in this constant arena of discontentment. And it was robbing them of the glory of God. They walk out and there's so much meat on the ground that they can't even walk through it. And their desire for something else that they're craving robs them of the glory of God that literally laid outside their tent. It robs them and it stole their joy. Instead of walking out and go, wow, look at all this. It robs them. It steals that moment. It corrupts their spirit. It hardens their heart to see what God was doing right in front of their eyes. And I think there's some of us that we've gotten to this place where we miss and we have been robbed of what God is doing right in front of our eyes because all we see is what we don't have and what we don't get instead of what the Lord has done for us. I don't know about you, but can we be honest for a moment this morning and go, yeah, this is kind of me right now. I don't really like it. In fact, I'm contemplating, if I was in person, it's awkward to get up and leave, but I can just kind of turn this off and nobody will know. I'm not sure I want to go any farther down this road this morning because this kind of resonates. This kind of hits me. But what I hope is that the response is like, I don't like this. I don't want to be like this. I'm aware of this. I want something different. I'm tired of this. I don't want to live this way. I know it's unfamiliar and maybe it's turned into a habit, but there's got to be a way to reverse this, right? I find fault where there's no fault to be found, and I don't want to do this. I recognize that bars have gone up and shackles have come on. I live in a constant state of this. I just want to give you the facts this morning. That nursing this mentality and blaming God for what you don't have and what you don't get won't make your atmosphere and your circumstance any better. Let me say it again, that nursing this mentality and blaming God for what you don't have and what you don't get will not make for a better atmosphere and it will not make for a better circumstance. It may get you a free steak dinner and that's about it. Because there's not going to come any sort of change that lasts. There's not going to be any sort of transformation. There's not going to be a lasting difference that's going to be made by you constantly and continually and habitually complaining. The fact is, it's only going to make things worse for you and it's going to make things worse for those around you. You remember their onslaught of complaints. If you go back and read just this story in its entirety, you remember the onslaught of complaints and their demands and their wishes. We're hungry. We're thirsty. We're tired. If only we had died back in Egypt. We don't even want to go where it is that you promised us. We don't want to do any of this. We're miserable. We don't even care anymore. We don't care about what can be and what could be and what will be. We don't even care about the promised land anymore. And God says, okay, I hear you. I hear you. God says, okay. He says, but you need to understand, be careful what you ask for, or better yet, be careful what you complain for. There's another account of this story found in Numbers. And in Numbers 14, look what he says. He says, as surely as I live, the Lord is talking here. He says, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very things I heard you say. Notice he doesn't say, I'm going to do what it is that I think you deserve. He says, no, I'm going to fulfill the very things I've heard you say, heard you complain about. And then look in that same context in verse 21, he says, I forgive them, which is comforting to know that even in the midst of this, that forgiveness and grace is found. But he says, I forgive them, but as I live and as the glory of the God fills the whole earth, look what he says, not a single person of those who saw my glory. I told you a minute ago, it robs us of seeing that glory. Not a single person of those who saw my glory, who saw the miracle signs I did in Egypt and the wilderness, and those who have tested me over and over and over again, turning a deaf ear to me. He says, not one of them will set eyes on the land I so solemnly promised to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with such repeated contempt will see it. And we go, that's harsh, God. And God says, well, that's what you asked for. And no, you didn't even ask. That's what you complained for, remember? In these moments of habitual discontent, this is what you wanted, right? See, it only makes things worse for you, and it only makes things worse for those around you. And I want you to hear this morning. Guys, this is a serious spiritual sickness. But it is a sickness that we can overcome. It is a sickness that we can be healed from. An atmosphere may not change and circumstance may not change immediately, but there can be something that happens in the midst of this that can change. You can come out of this better than you went into it. So how? So as we land this morning, let me just give you a couple of quick 2 or 3 things that I believe will make all the difference this week. You can put these things in practice this week. You can begin the evaluation this week. You can begin to think on these things and wonder and ponder through them. In fact, I hope you have the courage to look at somebody that's maybe watching this with you or knows you well and say, hey, is this me? Am I that person? Is that why we never go out to eat? I thought it was because everything was closed. Oh, you don't want to go out to eat because it's all. Be courageous enough to ask those questions. So what are those things? Here they are. Number 1, it starts with you checking your heart. Simple enough, check your heart. I want you to spend some time this week saying, I just want to be really brutally honest with myself. Because see, the heart of the matter is a matter of the heart. God knows what you need. God knows what you lack. God knows what you want. But how you respond and how you request makes all the difference. See, it was through the need, it was through the moment of scarcity that God was showing them his glory. It was that moment that he was showing them that, listen, I'm here and I care. I'm going to provide. I know what's going on in your heart. Will you not trust me with that? I love what Paul said. Paul says, I've learned, or better yet, let me give it to you another way. Paul says, I have taught my heart, meaning it didn't come natural. I had to learn this. He said, I had to teach my heart to what? To be content in all circumstances, in all things. It's a matter of the heart. So spend some time this week just being brutally honest and checking your heart. The second is this: where in life do you look for security and satisfaction? As you begin to feel life press in and you begin to feel the heat rise on life right now, where do you look for security and satisfaction? Does security only come in what you can do for yourself? Because there'll come a moment in the wilderness, in your desert, where you can't do. And then what? You physically can't do. You emotionally can't do anymore. Maybe spiritually, you can't do it anymore. You can't fix it. You can't change it. You can't sidestep it. You can't go around it. And then what? These moments where security and satisfaction crash in, do we begin to ask? Or do we accuse? Do we ask or accuse? Maybe your security or your satisfaction comes from someone else, and then all of a sudden they undercook your steak, and then what? They didn't meet your level of satisfaction. They didn't provide the security that you thought they would. Then what? Then what? Those won't work long term. So ask yourself this week, where does my security come from in my life right now? Well, where's my satisfaction come? Does it come from getting what I want or getting what I need? Does it come from complaining and getting a free ticket, or does it come by adoring and worshiping and praying to and asking for and depending on a God who is good and who never fails? And then finally, how would your life be different if both of those changed? If where you looked for security and where you found satisfaction, if both of those things changed, how would that look in your life? I want you to spend a minute this week saying and just asking God, God, show me show me what this new normal is supposed to look like. God, will you show me what new normal is? God, will you free me from excessive cravings? By the way, there's a word for those things. They're called idols. God, will you tear down idols that I find security in and I find satisfaction in? God, will you free me from excessive complaining and habitual complaining? Will you free me from grumbling and mumbling? Will you free me from my urges to constantly ask for the manager in life? God, and I'm going to begin to look for you, to you, for my satisfaction and my security. Guys, the wilderness, by design, is where things come really clear. You know, we've said for the last few weeks here that God does not waste the wilderness. In fact, the wilderness is where God draws us into Him so that He can clear up some things. He can remind us of some things. But understanding that and knowing that doesn't make the wilderness easy. It doesn't make it any less hard. It doesn't make it any less dry. It doesn't make it any less hot. It doesn't clear all the dust. It doesn't clear the pain. It doesn't clear the loneliness. It doesn't clear the worry. It doesn't clear all the anxiety, but God can, and He will. See, I believe that in the wilderness is where God is eager to show us, look at what I can give you, what I can provide for you. All you gotta do is ask. Oh, it may not be everything you want or think you're entitled to. We'll work on that later, but for now, I want you to know that I will sustain you. I've got this. I will satisfy everything you need. You know, I was thinking this week, what do I really have to complain about? I am forgiven. I've been set free. I don't have to worry about my salvation. I don't have to worry about isolation because God's always there. I don't have to worry about being loved. I don't have to worry about my balance of good and bad getting unbalanced. Oh, I did more bad this week than good, and so therefore I guess God's not going to be pleased with me as much as He was last week. You know, I tried, but you know what? Life just pressed in. I don't have to worry about those scales. I don't have to worry about doing enough. All I got to do is trust. I don't have to worry about being accepted. We live in a world right now where, you know what? Half of us are accepted and half of us are not. And then you go to the other side and you're not accepted where you were. And it's just we long to be accepted and know where we belong. And God says, you don't ever have to worry about being accepted and belonging here. Because I care. And I love you and I designed you. I created you in my image. I adopted you. I call you son. I call you daughter. I don't have to worry about those things. I have a God who will go out of His way, just like He did in this wilderness with the Israelites. He goes out of His way in my wilderness to show me that He loves me and that He cares, displaying this reckless love. So I don't know where you are this week, and I don't know what you've dealt with this week, and I can only imagine that a good portion of us, we deal with something different every day, and we react differently every day. And can I just say that we are here, even though we may not be in person, we are here to help you navigate this time. In fact, we may need you to help us navigate this time. So we want to continue to connect with you. We want to continue to help you take steps toward whatever it is that you need. Maybe it's a faith step. Maybe it's getting to know who Jesus is and what He's done for you and that freedom that is found in a relationship. Maybe it's baptism. We'll mask up, we'll glove up, we'll do whatever we need to do to make that happen because we want you to know who Jesus is. Maybe for you, it's just a step to be encouraged. It's a step to be known. And can I just tell you there's a way to do that? If you'll text 615-551-9900. Somebody is there. It's not an automated thing. It's our shepherds who are behind that text, behind that message that's going to say, I hear you, I love you, and so does God. Can I pray for you? Can I encourage you? Can we visit? You know, we can still do lunch together. And we're here for you in those moments. We're here to help you take the next step in your wilderness. And we may not clear the wilderness, but we can walk together through the wilderness. And we'll do it without complaining. And God will continue to show his glory. Father, this morning, as we sing about this reckless love that even in the midst of our complaints still showers our front lawns with meat and bread. And it doesn't make sense. God, you should teach us a lesson. But instead, you continue to give. You continue to show us grace. You continue to be patient. All we're asking now, God, is that you teach us to be better. That we come out of this different than we went in. And we fully step into the glory and the beauty of this new normal. We pray this through your Son's name. Amen.
Let's continue those thoughts. Let's continue that heart. Because we know we have a God who's chasing us. Who's chasing after us right now. We have a God who will go and is searching for you right now. That is speaking to you right now. Saying, come follow me. Come, let me show you what this new normal looks like. So we're going to finish in this last song by God's reckless love. Let's sing together. Singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. To everybody watching, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a blessed week. We will see you next Sunday.